Good evening. You have come to the November 25th workshop meeting for Pasco City Council. We have agendas available on the corner over here by the chief. If you'd like to, we also have a council packet that's available through the city's website. It's available electronically. We also televise our meetings both on Charter Cable as well as through the city's website and also on Facebook Live. And if you get a chance to speak with the council this evening, if you come to the podium and share with us your name, we'd appreciate that for record keeping. And finally, if you have any cell phones, I'd ask you to mute those so that the meeting is not interrupted. And with housekeeping taken care of, we'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Alvarado.
Present.
Maloney.
Present.
Martinez.
Present.
Milne.
Present.
Serrano, and Watkins.
Here.
Thanks.
And if you'll join us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item 3 on the agenda, verbal reports from council members. Anybody attend a meeting or event that they wish to share with council? And Mr. Serrano.
Thank you. I had the opportunity to attend the opening ceremony for Special Olympics with Councilman Milne and Councilwoman Barajas, and it was a wonderful time. I also read an article. I mean, they mentioned that there were 800 athletes, give or take, and there was also a pretty significant stream of almost $500,000 of revenue that brought into the Tri-Cities. So, in addition to having a great time and just celebrating these athletes, we're appreciative that they selected our area to invest their time and their money. And it sounds like they had a great time, and hopefully we'll be seeing them back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Serrano. Mr. Maloney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had two meetings I'd like to report on from last week. One was the Pasco Public Facility District meeting last Tuesday. They're continuing to progress in their planning efforts and really pulling together the whole packet. So hopefully we'll be seeing something, I think, in January. Mr. Ratka, is that? Yeah. So January timeframe, council should start seeing something from that group, so we can start really getting some good understanding of what exactly the PFD is proposing. In addition, I'll just say it briefly because I'm positive others can say much more about it. Last Wednesday we had the signing with the Colville with the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation for the agreement with that group, and I'm really excited that we're just one more way that Pasco becomes even more than it is by celebrating who we are and who we've been. So it's a wonderful thing to be part of. Thank you.
Well said, Mr. Maloney. Any others? Hearing none, we're going to move on to section 4 on the agenda, items for discussion. First item is related to a presentation related to an executive order. Mr. Zabel.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is actually a first for me where we actually have a presidential executive order impacting a state agency and how they've done business with the federal government for many decades, and requiring action on the part of the City Council if this particular program were to continue within our community. So, not surprisingly, I had to do quite a bit of research in the last week or two to run this down. It came as a little bit of a surprise. Matter of fact, several colleagues across the state watching this meeting and copying my agenda pack. So, there's a lot of scrambling going on about this one around the state. Anyway, long story short, President Trump issued Executive Order 13888 on September 26th that changed a bit how refugees are resettled across the United States. That order essentially requires now that the state consent to relocation refugees as well as the local government where the refugees would be intended to be relocated. And we have had certainly a relocation program within the Tri-Cities, including within Pasco, for many, many years. And that has necessitated our state agency, Department of Health and Human Services, and particularly the Office of Refugee and Immigrant Assistance, to coordinate with the cities across the state to try to work through some of this, I guess, this new curveball that we've been issued. I think it's got some pluses and minuses, and one of the pluses is heightens the awareness of the need, and gives council a bit of an active role. Minuses, it's created some complications. And with that, we've had a lot of information back and forth with DSHS, particularly State Refugee Chief Coordinator Sarah Peterson, who's here with us tonight, as well as Ken Primus, Director of World Relief. And I know they want to address council, and I think this would probably be an appropriate time for them to come up and discuss council, what it is they need from the city of Pasco.
Good evening. Thank you for coming tonight. We really do appreciate it. We know that this is something that's everybody is affected in. I also know that some folks thought maybe the mayor should just sign something, and I thought it would be best that we address this as a body, as a council. So appreciate you coming and helping us out.
Thank you. And thank you so much for the opportunity to come and visit the lovely city of Pasco. I get to come here on about a quarterly basis, but it's truly a beautiful city, and I really appreciated what you said about celebrating who you are, because Washington State has a long history of welcoming refugees. Since 1975, more than 150,000 refugees have come to Washington and have made their homes here. They've become teachers and elected officials and doctors, and it sounds as if there's a new elected member of the Pasco City Council, Ms. Roach, that was newly elected, which is a great representation of who we are. And Pasco, as a representative of the Tri-Cities area, also has a long history of welcoming refugees. For the past 30 years, more than 3,500 refugees have made their home here. And so it's definitely a rich part of who we are that I appreciate the opportunity to come and share with you. Tonight, I'm going to walk you through basically what a little bit about the program and the work that we do and how we help to walk with refugee individuals and families as they come to our local communities and to our state to help them achieve economic stability and integrate. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the overall national refugee resettlement program, and I'll get into some specifics about what happens here in the Tri-Cities region as well. So every state that participates in the refugee resettlement program identifies a position within the state's government administration to partner with local communities and the federal government to help coordinate the process by which people come into our communities and start to integrate and resettle. So my job as the Washington State Refugee Coordinator is to collaborate with refugee resettlement agencies in the local level, as well as other community partners, such as community-based organizations, school districts, colleges, and other state agencies to really help refugees when they first come to learn English, get a job, go back to college, get a health screening, and participate in all of the services that they need to eventually be able to become U.S. citizens. We take federal funding from the Federal Office of Refugee Resettlement, and we braid it with other state and federal resources to invest about $28 million into local communities. We have over 60 partners across the state that really are based in the communities, that emphasize hiring refugees and immigrants that speak the same language and are able to relate on a cultural basis to the refugees to really help them walk through that whole process. We focus our services on the health and wellness of refugees, as well as the employment and training programs, immigration assistance and naturalization, and whole family services. A refugee is someone very special, defined in law as somebody who's been forced to flee their home country because of a well-founded fear of persecution based on their race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular group, or their political opinion. These refugees are, by definition, identified outside of the United States and are brought to the United States through a formal U.S. refugee admissions program. Through our programs and our services, we're also able to work with people who have been granted asylum in the United States, as well as special immigrant visa holders from Iraq and Afghanistan, Cuban Haitian entrants, unaccompanied refugee minors, and certified victims of human trafficking. When we talk about people in our community who are foreign-born, many come with many different immigration statuses and many different experiences. Our focus is to really help those that have come here on a humanitarian basis to help them get access to the things that they need to be able to rebuild their lives. Because we also have other federal and state funding, we're also able to serve low-income immigrants who are lawful permanent residents or asylum seekers to help them on a pathway to economic stability through employment services and eventually able to help them naturalize. Like many programs in the federal government, the Refugee Resettlement Program is complicated. There are 3 different core buckets that I usually categorize as the different programs that help people come to the United States. The first is the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. This is administered by the Department of State in partnership with the Department of Homeland Security, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, the United Nations High Commission of Refugees, and many other external partners. And the idea is to identify those that are most vulnerable, that cannot return to their home country, and help to screen them through all of the appropriate vetting and proper in-person interviews through the Department of Homeland Security to ensure that this person has the appropriate identity and the proper clearance. Once that has happened, they are referred to the United States Reception and Placement Program. And the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, there is a resource and a document that I submitted that will walk you through all of those processes and steps. The U.S. Reception and Placement Program is a partnership with the Department of State and 9 national refugee resettlement agencies that is basically a bridge to help bring folks to the United States to help them once they get here. So in Washington State, we have 8 refugee resettlement agencies, including World Relief, which is located here in Richland and resettles refugees throughout the Tri-City area. And the idea is that of the Reception and Placement Program, it's a 30 to 90-day program, and it really just helps to meet that family at the airport with a proper interpreter and to take them to a new home that they found for that person. Or in many cases, it's done in conjunction with family members that are already living here. And so the family will help to locate the apartment and will help to greet them at the airport. And then they just help to walk them through that first process. Then the U.S. Resettlement Program is the process by which our office really helps to step in. We really work with our local partners like World Relief to make sure that refugees are getting the services that they need so that they can learn English, they can get a job, and that their kids can go to school and they can have access to all the proper services that they need. And all of this is funded by the Federal Office of Refugee Resettlement. So the United States, like I said, has a long history of welcoming refugees. And in federal fiscal year 2019, Washington State ranked 2nd in the country for the number of refugee arrivals we received. And in part, it's due to the great work that our refugee resettlement agencies are doing. I was just mentioning to Mr. Primus, the executive director here, that Washington State is home to the largest diaspora of Ukrainians in the United States, and that many of them are submitting applications called affidavits of relationship to help bring their family members over because they're suffering persecution because many of them are evangelical Christians and are not authorized to practice their religion. And under the current situation in Ukraine, we've been able, through the Lautenberg Amendment, to help resettle a significant number of Ukrainians in our communities. So last year, we welcomed 2,557 immigrants and refugees and special immigrant visa holders. And special immigrant visa holders, while they do not fall under the executive order of requiring consent, they still go through the same admissions process. They go through the admissions process, the reception placement program, and they're available for all of our services. So we include them as part of the people who we do work with. So in the Tri-Cities area, you can see that there's been some ups and downs from 2014 to 2019. And on an average basis, the number of refugees resettled in this area represent about 5% of the state's total. And as true with any human program, it's a little bit unpredictable. And so we don't have specific facts about exactly where people are resettling because they may be allotted to come to Kennewick, but their family chooses a house for them in Pasco. And so there's some movement there. But on average, we see about 10 to 13% of all refugee arrivals resettle directly in Pasco. And as we talked a little bit earlier, about 70% or more of all the refugees that arrived in 2019 and in 2018 in the Tri-Cities area come from Ukraine, followed by a handful of special immigrant visa holders from Afghanistan, Iraqis, Somalia, and several other countries. There's actually even a pretty significant number of Cuban Haitian entrants that would come to this area, as well as really for the state, the only Colombian refugees resettle in the Tri-Cities area.
And is it okay to ask questions along the way?
Sure, go ahead.
Can you
Toronto.
actually move back one more slide? So is this 10 to 13% of the 5% or 10 to 13% of the whole number?
10 to 13% of the whole number.
Okay.
So Mr. Primus estimated for me, so this data comes directly from the Department of State. And the Department of State assigns it to Richland because that's where the Office of World Relief is located. So Mr. Primus went back to their data and indicated that in the past 3 years, about 38 people have resettled directly into Pasco. So it's about 10% of that annual number.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry.
Mr. Martinez?
Ken Primus, I'm the director there, World Relief Tri-Cities.
See you.
We are anticipating the number we've received from the State Department is in fiscal year 20, we're looking at 150 refugees coming. Of those, we've already received 15 just in the last couple of weeks. 3 Burmese families for a total of 10, and then 2 SIV special immigrant visas from Iraq. One was a family of 4 that did settle here in Pasco, and then another one was an individual that arrived. So we do expect these numbers to hold. I would expect maybe 20 or so total arrivals in Pasco this year. Thank you.
And so my next question would be kind of in line with that, or to trailer with that, is how do they get chosen to come? How do the people get chosen to come here? Are you going to get to that?
No, I think it's a good question. And I want to make sure that this presentation and that our time is useful to all of you. So Mr. Primus can jump in anytime you want to. There's a pretty long process of determining where people go. And in recent years, as the number of refugee arrivals to the United States declined from I think in 2016, there were 85,000 refugees that arrived in the United States. And in 2019, there were 30,000 refugees. So as the number of refugees declined, we're really focused on family reunification. So I would say 85 to 90% of the refugees that were resettling in Washington State and in the Tri-Cities area have a family tie. Many are doing through that process of the affidavit of relationship, and others are have some type of connection. In addition, there's always been a process of looking at the localities. and identifying where are there similar language groups or similar ethnic groups. And so you might be interested to know that Ohio is home to a large group of Nepali Bhutanese, because they've all kind of resettled there and then they migrate. Many of you may have heard of the large Somali community in Minneapolis. Again, 1 or 2 families started going there, and then they all kind of, chose to go there either after arrival or upon arrival. A lot of it has to do with resources as well. So we do look at what resources are available. Is their cost of living affordable? Can they get a really great paying job? I was just speaking today with one of the employment specialists at World Relief that was talking about placing people at the Tyson chicken factory, and how it's a really good first job because it has stable hours. It's a permanent job, and they pay, I think, around $15 an hour. And so I think it's a good job for people and for their first job.
Thank you.
The other thing that's really important to think about is 50% of the families, of the people that arrive in the Tri-Cities area are children under the age of 18. So if you think about that 117 people that arrived, half of those were kids. And 85% arrive with refugee families of 2 or more. And I think there is about, the statistic isn't on the slide, but I want to say it's like 20% have, no, I'm sorry, that's too high. Let's say 15% may have families of 6 or larger. But you'll see, notice the other part are 49% are ages 19 to 64, which are really a working age. They're ready to go to work. And what we've seen a lot with the Ukrainians and the special immigrant visa holders is many are internationally educated. They have bachelor's degrees and master's degrees. The special immigrant visa holders worked with the U.S. government. They speak English. The Ukrainians have family members here. So they are ready and willing to start participating in our economy. These are all the different programs and services that are available to support refugees in the Tri-Cities area. So it starts with the reception and placement program offered by World Relief. The Department of Social and Health Services, Community Services Offices does provide cash assistance and food assistance for all refugee families and refugee individuals. There's a matching grant program, which is a 4-month employment and case management program that really helps people to get early self-sufficiency. We do Preferred Communities program is an intensive case management program. So if an individual or family has a complex medical need or a specific situation, they have available to them case management services to walk them through that process. And again, all of this goes through, we partner with World Relief to help people get jobs, learn English, help them to remove any barriers to those services. So we know that many refugees, because they're fleeing persecution, and their journey has had trauma involved. And so we try to make sure that people are getting access to mental health services, and all of our services are provided through the lens of trauma-informed care. And we really do believe that people who come to the United States and to the Tri-Cities area and to Washington in general are here to make a difference. They want a second opportunity to rebuild their lives. They want to make their lives, they want to give their children a better opportunity. And so we walk with them until they're able to naturalize, and even help them complete the citizenship application and the interview. I'll take questions.
And with that, well, and just tell me also a little bit, if this is not something that is new or even recent, I would imagine that this is, if I think back to my childhood where I'm in, excuse me, anybody else for the moment?
All right, I may have a politically charged question. So my understanding of this, and perhaps this is my bias, but I'm seeing this as a way to keep homogenous communities from becoming more diverse, and that's kind of my understanding. And so I'm kind of wrestle with this as far as my emotions about it. I guess my question is, how far am I from that as perhaps as a strategy for what I'm talking about?
That's a really good question. I think, and it might get to your point, Mr. Watkins, as well. Refugee resettlement under its current process has been in existence since 1980. It's not new. We've been welcoming diverse individuals for a long time and people from all over the world. And the highest number of refugee arrivals actually occurred under the Reagan administration, when we reached almost 200,000 people in a time when the United States stepped up to make sure that we were welcoming people. So I think that as public servants, we're always willing to do what it takes to help make sure to protect this program, to help people who are seeking safety and security. And we also, because we're here, because we believe that this program does help to make diversity in our programs. And I think Pasco and your desire to celebrate who you are, both with our Native people as well as with the people who are here, I think that's what America means to me. And I think that many people believe that.
And I'm going to attempt again. I'm getting over a cold. And thank you for the 1980 date, because that then does date back either shortly after Vietnam refugees and or the Cambodian crisis. And in fact, at the end of my term, I'm going to be doing some traveling. And one movie that stuck with me since I was a VCR kid was The Killing Fields in the 80s. And I remember the story of Death Prawn, who uncovered and televised that for the world. And did a little additional research and understand that his kids and his grandkids tend to reside in the Seattle or different areas of the country and have become productive members of society. And I realize, well, that is but one movie event. My understanding and from reading of this is the folks that tend to be refugees tend to be more productive members of society than not. And so when this came to me, and I should also share that this is not completely foreign to me, in that I've gotten an email or two over the years from this group, just letting us know as a sort of as a courtesy to the mayor that there is something going on, and I think my response then is these are people that are vetted to be checked in, and there is an assistance and a structure that's going to support that they're going to be able to become productive citizens. And so that is, I think, the basis that we should proceed here. And there's two things. And this is getting a little bit sappy, but I do believe that America has been a beacon of light for the hope for the oppressed in the world. And America, I believe, has an open heart to help those people out. And so as America does, so I think Pasco does as well. And I think the question here tonight for us is, the three choices, and I hopefully we don't do one, which is no action, because it would just mean the program would be dissolved. We can do just a simple statement, support it, or, and I having actually talking with Dave, and I'm guessing you as well, maybe possibly a resolution where we tend to mirror the things that we know that are successful parts of the national program, and affirm those things in some manner, is something I hope that we would want to adopt fairly shortly as a body, is my thought. But again, this was asked of the local agency, so here we are tonight, and hopefully we'll move forward in something along that line. Other thoughts, Mr. Serrano?
Thank you. One question I do have, breaking your numbers down, it looks like you're talking about probably 5 to 10, maybe max 15 housing units. Where is that inventory? Does it come from low income, and who provides assistance for that? I didn't see that up there. That's a loaded question, I tell you, because our low income housing is highly impacted. So I want to make sure that if we're resettling even 10 to 12 families, that we're not taking inventory that someone that's been on a waiting list for 6, 12, 18 months could otherwise have that's already here.
Do you want to?
I'd be happy to.
Council, again, Ken Premise, World Relief Tri-Cities. Actually, 100% of the folks that resettle in Tri-Cities, or excuse me, in Pasco, are resettled in Pasco because they have family here that they're going to live with.
Okay.
Only possible exceptions, and I know there's a family that arrived from Iraq just a week or so ago. Ms. Peterson mentioned that they tend to be fairly educated. The mother is a lawyer, the father is a professional basketball player. They weren't really satisfied with the housing we had picked out for them. So using their own funds, they're finding housing here in Pasco, not anything from the low income
Okay.
inventory. as you
No, I
noticed.
appreciate that because, one thing we're weighed against is what's
Oh,
the right thing to
certainly.
do for these people, and does it impact those who are here, especially in the event that it's taking inventory from those who have already been on a wait list or something of that nature.
Now, the majority of the folks who come to Tri-Cities are housed initially in Kennewick. We have a couple apartment complexes there that we work closely with. We've occasionally been criticized by DSHS in that we settle them in housing in apartments that are too expensive because the grant money that we're tied to requires that the homes be clean, be safe, not have peeling paint, that we're putting them, we're not putting them in some roach infested place for them to live in. So they're getting good housing, good quality, clean apartments at a good rate. And the majority of those that we're finding that we've worked with have been in Kennewick, but there are the few family members in Pasco, rarely, but occasionally in Walla Walla, Moses Lake as well, where they have family members that they're going to go live with, and those are the cases that we have resettle in Pasco.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Mayor, I'm supportive of option 3, right sizing this for Pasco.
Mr. Maloney?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So my wife's father was a refugee. He came over to America when Fidel was taking power in Cuba. He came over without family, was settled actually right outside Pullman, Washington, as part of Operation Pedro Pan. There was actually an entire a camp for Cuban refugees. He came over when he was 15. He learned English and the school system there. He went to college at WSU, worked at WSU for 20-something years before moving down to California, starting a business, eventually moving over to Miami like many good Cubans do, and continuing to be a small business owner until he chose to retire and passed the business on. So, my wife's story is very much tied into the story of refugees and America being that true land of opportunity. So I am very supportive of continuing, not just continuing this program, but doing what we can to support and understand that this is important for our community. Thank you.
Other thoughts? Mr. Serrano, you right at the end of it, you suggested the word limits. Would it be possible that this is something that's new to us, but if we do a letter to support with a resolution, if this is something that we could have a report from DSHS or the organization on maybe on an annual basis. It doesn't need to be a formal thing to come here, but just present some stats of how things are going. Would that be an unreasonable burden on this program to consider something like that?
No, we would love to actually come and make sure that we're sharing information. And we, part of the Refugee Resettlement Agency's responsibility is to engage in quarterly community consultations. And so every quarter, there's an open public forum where I come and speak and I share the statewide statistics, and World Relief shares the local statistics. And we would be happy to share any information that the council would need.
Okay. Mr. Zabel, we've talked about this a little bit before. Do you think we're headed there to being able to fill out a number 3 option at this point?
Yes, I think we can put together a resolution. I think the one point that council needs to be aware of, and Ms. Peterson and I talked about it before the meeting, there is that language about consent that kind of has to be incorporated in our resolution so that it's clear to the federal government that the city of Pasco, if the resolution were to pass, does consent to refugee resettlement under the terms and conditions of the executive order.
Is that acceptable with council? We'd like to do that as soon as is reasonable, because we also understand there is a time frame to do that. And would that be acceptable for DSHS and also the resettlement group?
Very much so, yes, Mr. Mayor.
And I also understand too that I think Mr. Maloney's point too is personalized it of a specific example. I'm going to hazard a guess you can do with just a nod. That's probably a common story that you have with people who do resettle in our country and become eventually become American citizens. So I like the nod. I appreciate that.
Yeah, if you read Governor Inslee's letter, he shares a very dear story of how a young Somali girl who resettled in the Seattle area at the age of 6 grew up to be a doctor and is now the head of pediatrics at Harborview Medical. And so I think it is she's an exemplary person in and of herself, but there are many, many examples like that.
And I think you just remind me too, met Representative Mia Love from Utah, who was a Somali refugee as well, and consider one of those people as well myself. So, Mr. Zabel, any other thoughts?
One other, just to give council a bit of a heads up, December 9th is probably we're gonna have a couple of items on that to make a special meeting with the Thanksgiving holiday. It makes it a little short this week, but.
So we do that that's normally gonna be a workshop meeting, but we'll do it as a special meeting?
At least a portion of it, yes.
As a portion of it, okay. So we're gonna expect action then on December 9th, then, which we should meet the date that you're hoping for.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you, sir, too, for coming. It's good to see a name to the emails that I've received a couple times over the years.
I very much appreciate the council taking this up this evening and consenting with us as a Class 81 Bulldog. I always remember Pasco being a welcoming community, a multicultural community, and I'm glad to see that's continuing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
With that, we're through section 4A. We're going to go on to section 4B on the agenda, mid-biennium budget adjustment. Ms. Sigdell or Mr. Zabel
Well,
first?
I'm going to kick it off with a few introductory comments, and then our finance director will take it over and walk us through the numbers. So, broad array of municipal services provided by a workforce of hundreds involving hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money. So something a little more familiar to council than the topic we just completed. So, but as Mayor mentioned, we're reaching the midpoint in the city's biennial budget. And we have a statutory obligation to review the budget. And in this case, it's necessary to make some changes. A lot of dynamics at play when you're talking about the work product and capital projects and so forth involved in a budget of this size. In many cases, you're going to see need for adjustments because of economic downturns or disasters or other incidents causing losses, and those adjustments can be drastic in most cases, and this is one of those. Adjustments simply reflect some changes, minor variances in revenue and expenditures that occur over time, and in that this is our first adjustment of a first biennial budget and our first adjustment, I'm very pleased to report that the proposed amendments are very minor. They're $1.6 million, 1.6% increase in revenue and a 1.4% increase in expenses. And share that the bulk of what you'll hear from the Director Sigdell, the bulk of these increases are the result of some pretty positive news. They're changes to projects, many we've discussed with council in prior meetings and have council approval, LIDs, repairs to process water reuse, force main system paid for by the processors, things like that. Big ticket items that kind of drive that 1.4%, but things we've already talked about. And then also the budget adjustment accounts for staff's request for 3 additional FTEs. I'll chat about those in a minute. In that the budget was developed around council goals. There's considerable narrative in the budget, in the budget adjustment message on some of the successes already in 2019, and I'd be happy to spend a whole bunch of time talking about those, but I know you've already read them. And so I'll just list that the accomplishments are, I think, pretty impressive. They reflect commitment on the part of the council, particularly in terms of revenue and work at the legislature last session, as well as direction, and staff and the capacity of the organization. And I think they really reflect the alignment of those efforts with council goals and direction. So I'll skip the big list. Looking forward, and we've experienced a pretty strong year in all growth sectors in terms of revenue, and that includes, I think we're at last count, 525 single-family home starts in Pasco. We expect a few more, obviously, before the end of the year. And also recalling the portion of the CIP portion of the 2019-2020 budget. Word used in the budget message is bold, and it was, in terms of the creation of inclusion of a lot of projects where we didn't have funding, and we were counting that funding materializing, and a lot of it has. And council's heard a lot about that, and we've moved forward on a number of those. This budget reflects that. Just a few quick highlights. Looking forward to next year. Design is complete on the animal control shelter. Costs have been updated, that's reflected in this budget. And the funding source, as we talked about just last week, has shifted a bit to LTGO bond proceeds rather than cash. Talking about community center, that's shifted from LTGO to cash. Using the animal control shelter dollars, that is a high priority. We've also been able to ramp up some of the funding for that project with the property sale of city-owned property, and be able to move that project forward on a quicker, I think, pace than what we otherwise had planned in this 2-year budget. The 8th Street Sporting Complex, the city's receipt of $350,000 competitive state grant allows us to move that project up and fund phase 1 of that project. And the fire training facility is another project that we're adding to this budget. Enhancements to it, and those enhancements specifically are the addition of a bathroom and hazmat wash facility. The project has been extremely successful, just providing a very invaluable training tool, but we do have some needs out there that the original grant didn't cover, that we need to address now. A couple other things, talked about the comprehensive plan just a few weeks back, and budget reflects a $50,000 increase in what was budgeted for that plan. The plan was closer to $350 than the $300 estimated when the budget was prepared. Chapel Hill Boulevard there was a lot of hope in the budget, not a lot of money, and since then we've got an LID and we have a project almost completed. That's reflected in your budget. Peanuts and Farmers Market, council was successful, and among other things, last session we were able to get a $154,000 grant from state legislature in their capital budget. Also successful in moving forward the Section 108 loan through HUD, and so the funding's been secured for this project as well. Process water reuse upgrades underway, and funded for the most part by the processors. However, we do have a couple grants out there that we can't quite get reimbursement for now, so you're going to see a request for an interfund loan on that project. And then the staff increases, I did want to touch on those very quickly. So we have 2 senior management staff in the fire department. We're in need of a deputy chief. We have 4 stations now. That got us to the Group 3 rating, community rating, but those additional stations and responsibilities, as well as the complexities added to the GEMT and ambulance facility, has really kind of taxed our existing staff. Addition of a deputy chief is going to allow for, I think, a much more proactive approach on some of the long-range strategic planning efforts that are necessary, and some separation from operations. You can be able to, that staff will be able to focus instead of running flat out constantly. administrative assistant in our Human Resources Department. We've been utilizing a temporary assigned position for a while now. And workforce has grown, the complexities, we have the new sick leave law. Things are happening all the time that are impacting human resources, and our current technical staff, they're pretty busy with recruitments and so forth, management of benefits and the benefits self-insurance program, risk management, safety, and they want to advance into some proactive training that they're not able to take care of now. They've been trying to transition into a more proactive posture for the organization and keep getting pulled into reactive. And so the need for that additional permanent administrative support is there, and we're proposing that position. And then a staff accountant. This one is related in large part due to the GEMT program. We are currently spending money on a third-party accounting assistance right now to the tune of about $70,000 a year for just a little bit more. We can get an employee that would be available to us year-round. Probably the accounting piece of that for GEMT represents about 2 to 3 months worth of effort over the course of a year. We get basically 9 months of an FTE for about $15,000. So that's, to me, a smart move. And at this point, I want to turn it over to Director Sigdahl. She'll walk us through the numbers.
Thank you, Mr. Zabel. Mayor and Council, I think Mr. Zabel actually covered all of it.
Not the exact numbers, though.
Not the exact numbers, that is true. You do have all of the numbers in your packet, and how they are organized is your funds. You have 40 plus funds in the packet with the beginning fund balances, revenue, expenditure, and ending fund balances. I do apologize for a wall of numbers, but you do manage a lot of funds, and each funds are considered accounting-wise to be their own entity. And so any transfers between those funds, you have to essentially authorize for same expense if there is a transfer twice in 2 different funds. So those numbers sometimes tend to show up in a couple of different places. As Mr. Zabel mentioned, this biennium adjustment or review is about 1.6% increase in revenue and 1.4% increase in expenditure overall. Historically, those percentages have been as high as 12 to 15%. So we're trying to get that percentage as low as we possibly can. General fund is, of course, your largest fund, and so due to that, we're breaking this out just a little bit. Overall, in terms of operating cost, you're looking at an increase in revenue of $2.2 million. A large part of that is the fact that the council has the goal of selling surplus property that the city owns, and we've been quite successful at it. And that's a little bit less than $1 million. And additionally, the building permits that we talked about, and as well as sales tax. We're always trying to be very conservative when we are budgeting for those things. They're very sensitive to even, the economy does not have to be slow. People just have to think that it has to be slow for them to stop shopping. And as an example, this year, because Thanksgiving is so late in November, there's talks of how the sales tax will be given the shorter Christmas shopping season. So there's a lot of factors that impact it, so we always try to be on the conservative side while we're budgeting for it. And in terms of expense, we're breaking it out even further and just looking at it on a year-to-year point of view. So for 2019, we are about $200,000 over in close to a $69 million budget. And it's mostly due to increase in insurance premiums. We have insurance through WCIA, as well as some of the unexpected overtime that we had. It was a little bit more than $200K when you combine all of the expenses, but we did comb through all of our budgets and looked for all of the efficiencies so that this number is as low as we possibly could go. For 2020, even though it is a biennial budget, we're just trying to be a little bit transparent in terms of what we need for 19 and 20, since this is our first biennial budget. And we are expecting the same trend for overtime, especially in the public safety realm, as well as more than budgeted insurance premiums as well. We will probably be coming to you with a wage scale adjustment for non-represented employees here soon. So some of that proposed adjustment is included within this proposed budget. And the policy considerations. And what you see in this slide is essentially 0.5 FTE for the deputy fire chief. That's the impact to the general fund. And the other half of it would go to ambulance fund, as well as 1 FTE, which would be a full impact to general fund, and 0.25 FTE of staff accountant, which would be the impact to general fund as well. And the rest of that FTE would also be charging to ambulance fund. In terms of capital cost, we had our REIT fund, our capital improvement REIT fund, that was funding some of the design costs for our fire stations. And of course, as the year has gone by, we've had better cost estimates for those relocation projects. So that is the increase that you see. And like I mentioned before, each fund is its own entity. And so you see some of these cost reduction increase in several places. And in terms of expenses, you see a reduction of 1.7, and that is largely due to delaying of the construction schedule for Station 84. We don't anticipate all of the project to be completed in 2020, so we will need that money in 2021. However, there are some proposed increases. Some of it are already included in our 2020-2025 CIP, like the Peanuts Park $1.2 million, and wayfinding and the remodel and alerting for Station 81 and 82, and the addition of the bathrooms to the fire training facility. Please free to stop me whenever you have questions.
Keep moving through.
Okay. So in terms of other, this is the best way I could find to present this data to you. Sometimes a lot of the funds are just transfers. So revenue, the $4 million, recent action by council in terms of LTGO bond proceeds for GISA Stadium and animal control. They will just come into general fund, and then they will go out of general fund for the projects to be completed. And also the Chapel Hill LID investment that you chose to make very recently. Street fund is a fund that always has a very low fund balance. And if we need more than what is there, then general fund will usually provide for it. So we take action when it's absolutely needed. We're looking at about 260 for revenue and 250 for expense. Large part of it is just related to increased activity in residential overlay. And there was impact from last year's snow event, but the fund balance is not quite zero yet. But another snow event will get us there. So I would not be surprised if we come back to you with some action in future. Arterial street fund is where we get B&O taxes or utility taxes, and we essentially do arterial street work. And many times it is matching for our grants. And we're looking at a reduction in expenses of about $560,000, and that's mostly related to schedules of all of the transportation capital projects as included in the CIP. 182 impact fee, it's an increase of $200,000, all related to Interstate 182 access evaluation, which was presented as Road 76 overpass in 2020 and 2025 CIP. And essentially what we're proposing here is to move that project forward. In the CIP, it's listed as a project to be started in 2025. So we're proposing that we do this project in 2020 instead.
This is the council, some of the council may recall, we did a first phase of this with Berger ABAM about 3-4 years ago. And so this picks up where that phase left off. And we're gonna start to focus on how we can really look at, for instance, 395, 182 junction, and expand accessibility to Interstate 82 from some of the surface streets, as well as the 2 overpasses and some other areas where we might be, the theoretical, I guess, the preliminary idea of an interchange on 12 connecting Tank Farm Road and A, and getting that coordinated as a overpass rather than the at-grade crossings that we have there right now. So just looking at those things, trying to move those ideas, concepts forward and turn this into a much safer corridor for the community and region.
And Mr. Zabel, is it also fair to at least some measure look at this also through the lens of recent initiative passing related to $30 car tabs as well? Is that a fair, or are these different funds?
Yeah, there is some impact for that, but this particular process, this particular project or evaluation was before 976. I mean, this is just the needs along that corridor.
Street Overlay Fund, essentially an increase of $450,000, and this is similar to, this fund also transfers money over to Street Fund for our street crews to do some of the residential overlay. There's just been more activity on residential and arterial overlay program. Revolve Abatement Fund, which is usually a fund that we do not talk about, but there is a significant increase compared to the fund size that we're asking for, and that is about $250,000 in expenses, and there's also some increases to the revenue as well. And most of this increase, this request, is related to abatement activity, mostly related to one property.
A specific project, one, and not a continuing operation.
That is correct. Park Development Fund, we usually collect all of our park development impact fees, and as the neighborhoods are being built, we build parks around them. And you will see an increase of $2.2 million for as a proposed budget in this area. And a large part of that is due to our request to move forward with a land purchase for Community Park Northwest. And that accounts for about $1.4 million. We're just looking at buying land earlier so it doesn't get expensive later. In the CIP, it was scheduled for at a later year, but we're requesting that we start that process in 2020. As well as the Booth Fields parking lot, which we also call the Little League parking lot, if that's unfamiliar to you, which is about $600,000. Capital Improvement REIT Fund, this is where all of our real estate excise taxes are collected. We are looking at about $1.2 million increase in revenue, which is quite a significant increase to what we budgeted. And that is mainly due to increased sales activity of homes and also, of course, higher sales, sale prices. There's also decrease in expenses, and they are due to the list of the projects that are on the screen. Mainly, we have taken off animal shelter out of this fund budget since it will be paid for by the LTGO bond. As well as refunding the fire station relocations. But we are adding a few things like Peanuts Park, and as well as the City Hall remodel that we had discussed in the past. Utilities Fund, the revenue decrease is really nothing to be concerned about. As we are going into preparation of the biennial budget, we were thinking we're going to need some bond proceeds to complete some of the project. As we went through 2019, we realized there would be no need for it, just given the project schedule, and we would not want to sit on bond proceeds and not spend them, but pay debt service on that. And about $1.5 million in expenses, most of which is related to changes to schedules in capital projects. Similar story with sewer, and all of these projects are as listed in our CIP with few changes here and there. And then for our reuse facility, one thing to note here is that there is a $2 million maintenance project, which is not usually listed in any of our capital projects. And because it's just a biosolid disposal, and you did recently approve a contract for that. And there is inter and intra-fund loans, and because each fund is their own entity, if one is loaning money to the other, we have to get approval from the council, and it's listed as an expense with a debt service schedule and all of that. We are asking for an intra-fund loan from general to marina fund for about $450,000. We are hoping that this will be paid by the end of next year. And this is due to our insurance proceeds have not been received yet, but we have spent those funds. And so right now the marina fund is in negative cash balance situation. And the general to ambulance fund, we talked about the $2 million last year, and the council did authorize the interfund loan at $2 million with revisiting the topic of $700K in loan forgiveness, which you have authorized, but we wanted to report that we will need that loan forgiveness. It is coming in as expected, but I was hoping that we would get more, and we didn't. So we would need that $700K in loan forgiveness. As well as general to stadium fund, they have been working on the improvements for $1 million so far this year. And we are expecting the bond proceeds to arrive before the end of the year. But we're just covering our bases right now, and so you will see a resolution for it. If they do arrive, then it's just not needed. Intra-fund loan are kind of rare, and usually it's just our effort to be more transparent. If council remembers, back in 2017, we had an irrigation rate study, and you had several options to pick from, and one of the options was a 3% rate increase over several years with kind of helping with the cash flow, getting about $815,000 in loan from Water Fund. We were waiting till the irrigation fund really needed it, because it also can't afford the debt service for money that it's not using. So we are at a point where in 2020 we will need those that $815,000 cash infusion, as well as water to reuse facility at $5.2 million. We will be issuing a bond if council approves next year, and some of the grant reimbursement, we have hit a snag on that. So we'll need some money for just this year, and we're hoping a repayment will happen by the end of next year.
And appreciate your summary page. And so let's see if I've got it also. We got a biennial budget that's about $500 million. It's a plan. We do the best that we can to a plan. You're saying that we're between 1% and 2% adjusting with the cases of expenses and as well as income. In this also some suggested modifications and a changing course, particularly with staffing, as we've been increasing and experiencing more people wanting to live in the wonderful city of Pasco. Some capital projects also and better outlook as far as sales tax as well, and this is the kind of thing we typically do at the end of the year to adjust. Yeah. That's the shorter version of it.
You got it all.
Mr. Zabel?
There's only one thing I'd add. Unless there is objection from council, we plan on bringing this back on December 2nd for a public hearing and council action.
So tonight is a workshop. Let council, if we're okay with it, proceed forward to that December 2nd meeting, the hearing, and adopt it that evening unless council has objections or concerns or wants further discussion. Mr. Maloney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, staff, for the presentation. So I did have some questions, and I did send them over to the city manager and Ms. Sigdahl as well. One of the key one being, I am concerned about how many policy asks we continue to make of the planning department. And Mr. Zabel is reassuring me that due to our restructuring of co-locating our planning department, engineering department, that this will free up some resources through those efficiencies. And so, Mr. Zabel, I'll hold you to that because we keep asking for more out of the planning group, and it's not reasonable to ask for more and not also provide the adequate resources to meet that need. So I just want to make that statement to everyone that I'm glad to hear that we are getting some efficiencies, and I hope there will be enough. The other two questions I had were related to Lewis Street underpass or overpass. Sorry. I see that the budget still has it as though there has been no change. I know that we can't predict the future on this one. Is that the prudent course of action at this point?
I don't think that, trying to guess what might happen over the next 60 to 90 days, difficult to do. I think where we're going to have to be and where we are not authorized by local programs from Washington State Department of Transportation to move forward on this project. And so it's going to sit until the legislature makes a decision. So we're not in danger of spending money we aren't going to have. And, we're hopeful of getting backfilled in some way or another by the legislature. And we just have to work through this session and see what happens.
So hold the course and just lobby the best we can to make sure that the governor's office and the legislature understand exactly how important this need is.
Yes.
Excellent. Last item, Ms. Sigdahl, you had indicated that we discussed just so briefly about the irrigation fund. How are our rates doing? No adjustments needed at this time?
No, we've not. We essentially built the budget and did the evaluation last year. And we are not in need of any rate increases this year.
Great news. Thank you.
I'm just going to, if I remember right, we punted a bit either last year or year before or both, but still able to do it within the existing structure. Well, that kudos to staff and efficient working to keep that going on then, too. Ms. Sigdahl, other thoughts?
None?
Other questions or discussion? So ready to present it to the public in public hearing and potential adoption at our next council meeting. Okay, sounds good. We'll move on to section C on the agenda related to relatively small housekeeping amendments to Title VI for animal control behavior testing standards. Mr. Ratguy.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Through the passage of House Bill 1026, the Washington State Legislature recently enacted a new statute which addresses the requirements that cities and counties must meet in order to be able to enforce or enact breed-specific regulations for dogs within their city codes. When state statutes are enacted or modified, staff in the city attorney's office review applicable municipal code sections to assure continued compliance with the amended statutes in order to maintain the city's municipal code, and recommended code revisions make sure that they are appropriate. This particular item is a case where minor revisions are necessary. The current provisions of Pasco Municipal Code Title VI meet most of the requirements of the new statute. However, a few minor revisions to the city's regulations are necessary in order to maintain consistency with the revised RCW in order to meet their effective date of January 1st, 2020. The proposed substantive revisions within the ordinance will serve to slightly ease current regulations by adding additional alternatives for pet owners to demonstrate compliance with the city's codes provisions, and adding additional frequency of testing for when canines cannot meet the good behavior test. There are also some formatting revisions one revision is intended to clarify the operative code section in the event of violation of Title 6.05.110 and Title 6.05.320 subsection 2. At this time, staff just merely requests discussion and consideration of the attached draft ordinance in order to remain compliant with recently amended state statutes. I and City Attorney Ferguson are here to answer any questions of City Council.
Council questions on this or discussion? And I'm also aware that I have seen on some social media, if there's anybody here this evening who wanted to speak on this, I'd give an opportunity. I'm not seeing any hands raised. Point two, and I understand, we know that there is going to be some change coming within the state. My hope and expectation, we do these housekeeping changes, that if Pasco ends up wanting to reconsider the way it does things, maybe that's something that would be considered in the coming year after we do that. And I see also we have potentially a retreat and when the new seated council. Staff suggestion to put those, the changes, continue what we've been doing for the past 15-ish years. And if you want to reevaluate next year, does that sound reasonable? Okay, Mr. Radke, if you could put those on the agenda then for consideration for the housekeeping issues, we'll do that then. That'll take us out through the end of the year at least.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, this will be on the December 2nd agenda.
Okay.
Thank you.
With that then, anything, let's see, we're through section 4, we go to 5, miscellaneous discussion. Mr. Zabel.
None this evening.
Okay, council, any miscellaneous discussion need to cover? We do have need for an executive session. Purpose of which is to consider acquisition of real estate. The session is expected to last approximately 10 minutes. Will be attended by the city manager, city attorney, and also Mr. White. No, of course, action during that session, reconvene the meeting and then adjourn the meeting. So if it is 8:12 now, we'll be in executive session until about 8:22. And we are back from executive session, and we're just a minute or two over. We do our best to estimate with no action to be taken. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you all for coming.